There are a lot of Christians who believe that all things happen by chance. They do not see the coordination of events being under the direction of God. They believe that God controls some of the things, but not everything. In their opinion, too many things are happening all the time for God to control them all. This morning, those people will be proven wrong. Even though God is not mentioned by name, not even once in our story today, we will see that He was controlling all the events. Today we will learn that God is sovereign in the nations of the world. We will also learn that the people of God are appointed to a specific place at a specific time for a specific purpose. God has a specific plan for each and every one of you. Our story today takes place in Persia. Currently, it is Iran. God had many Jewish people living there. Unfortunately, the right-hand man of the king, the second in command, was an extremely wicked, evil man. He hated the Jews. He wanted to destroy the Jewish race. God knew his plan to eliminate all the Jews in that country. And God needed only one person to stand in the gap to stop this potential massacre. And He would choose a poor, orphan Jewish girl raised by her uncle to defeat the plan of that powerful evil man. She will deliver all the Jews from a sure death. So today we take the story of the girl named Esther. So please turn to the Bible, to the book of Esther, and we will start with chapter 2. Contrary to the other stories in the Bible, this story does not take place in Israel, but in Persia. People assume that Esther was a queen in Israel. She was not. There was only one queen in Israel, a bad one. Her name was Athaliah in 2 Kings chapter 11. When her son, King Ahaziah, died, she destroyed all the royal heirs and she seized the position of the queen. In our story, God needed to bring Esther and her uncle Mordecai to special places of leadership. But the leadership was already well established. There was no opening. In chapter 1, God made an opening in the leadership. During a banquet, the king got drunk. He wanted to show off his beautiful wife, Queen Vashti, but she refused to come at the drunk king's command. No, I'm not coming. And she was removed, and a search was made to replace her. That's how God made an opening in the leadership. Our story starts in chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarter, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparation be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." Ahasuerus is a title. like Pharaoh is a title. It means king. His real Persian name was Kashayarsha. The Greeks called him Xerxes. His father was Darius the First, and his grandfather was Cyrus the Great. Later, Xerxes remembered Vashti in verse 1. He might have had second thought or regrets for getting drunk and getting rid of the queen. So his attendant proposed a plan that a search be made for the most beautiful girls in the kingdom, and that they brought those girls to the king's harem in verse 2. Then Xerxes could choose the one he liked the best and make her his new queen in Vashti's place. And he agreed, and the search began. The girls were to be under the care of Haggai, verse 3. He was a eunuch. A eunuch means that he had been castrated. In the eastern countries, women were entrusted to the care of castrated men who no longer had desire for women. They were kind of safe with them. And the plan pleased Xerxes, and the search started in verse 4. In verses 5 to 7, another character is introduced, a Jewish man named Mordecai in verse 5. He was a Benjamite from the tribe of Benjamin, born in Persia, where many Jews had been deported. His grandfather was Kish, and he had been carried away from Jerusalem, verse 6, we're told, with a group that included King Jeconiah of Judah, the king of Judah in the south. Mordecai had a niece, a Jewish girl named Hadassah, Myrtle, verse 7. We are told that she was lovely and beautiful. When her parents, Mordecai's uncle and Mordecai's aunt, died, he adopted his niece and raised her as his own daughter. But he changed her name to Esther, which means star. Hadassah was too Jewish. He did not want that name for her. In verses 8 to 11, many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel. Also, Esther was taken to the king's palace. Notice that one word. She was taken. Neither her nor Mordecai had any choice in the matter. She did not volunteer. She did not ask to be part of that contest. The girls were picked by leaders of the 127 provinces. And that explains why Esther ended up marrying a Gentile in violation of Jewish law. It was not her choice, nor was it Mordecai's choice. God allowed it because it was going to save the lives of many people. Likewise, Moses allowed men to divorce their wives because of the hardness of their heart, Jesus said in Matthew 19. Many women might have ended up killed because of the hardness of their heart, so Moses allowed the divorces. Also, Rahab was allowed to lie in order to save the lives of the spies. It is possible to repent from any sin, but lives cannot be brought back. They are more important. Haggai, the keeper of the harem, showed special favor to Esther. Somehow he liked her. He gladly supplied her and her attendants beauty preparation besides her allowance. They all had an allowance, and he gave her a little bit more. He also gave her the best place in the house of the women, and that was the Lord's doing, watching over his girl. In obedience to Mordecai, she did not reveal her ethnic origin, never mentioned to no one that she was Jewish. Although Mordecai could not contact Esther directly, he had ways of getting news to her every day. He wanted to know about her progress, and he paced in front of the court every single day, we are told in verse 11. In verses 12 to 14, we see the preparation of the young ladies. It lasted 12 months, much longer than your wife takes to get ready. Most guys complain about their wife takes so long. It took them 12 months here. They went through a ceremonial purification program with ointments, spices, and cosmetics. Then when the turn of each one came, she could request anything in the way of apparel, adornment, or jewelry, in verse 13. She then spent one night with the king and would never be with him again unless she so pleased him and he would ask for her by name, we are told in verse 14. Notice in verse 14, in the morning, the young woman returned to a different house, the second house of the women, to the custody of a different eunuch named Shahazgaz, who kept the concubine. Because the girl had slept with the king and had sex, she could no longer return home. She could not be married to anyone. She remained a concubine for the rest of her life, living kind of a widow's life. The story continues in verse 15. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. So when Esther's turn came, instead of making lavish requests for beautification, she followed the advice of Haggai, verse 15. Maybe it suggested that she depend on her natural beauty and not on a ton of makeup like Tammy Faye Baker. I heard a guy say, my girlfriend was so ugly, she came in second place at a beauty contest. His friend said, what's wrong with that? Second place is pretty good. The guy said, she was the only contestant. So Esther won Xerxes' favor and approval, so much so that at once he chose her to be his queen in verse 17. This all took place in the 7th year of King Xerxes' reign, which is 4 years after he had removed Vashti. It appears that it took 4 years for the search and the selection of Esther. It does not mean that the king slept with a different girl every night for 4 years. He'd be dead. Verse 19, there's a little difficulty there. It says the virgins of Persia would assemble a second time. There was not a second selection. There was not a second chance to be chosen. It seems that even after the contest was over and Esther had been chosen to be the queen, there were still virgins being brought to Xerxes' harem from the 127 provinces. But it was too late. A new queen had already been chosen. In verses 20 to 23, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he by chance learned of a conspiracy to assassinate the king. He heard people talking and they were going to kill the king. And he immediately informed Queen Esther, who then told the king. And Esther named Mordecai as the source of this information. The conspiracy proved true, and the conspirators were executed, but Xerxes forgot about rewarding Mordecai. That was the Lord. This incident may at first seem unimportant, but later you will see that it was all part of God's plan to save the Jews from extinction. The story continues in chapter 3, verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Aman, the son of Ammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servant who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's word would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. There is a gap of 5 years between chapter 2 and chapter 3. Esther had been queen now for 5 years. A new character is introduced in our story. His name is Haman. The man was promoted by King Xerxes to the post of chief official over the entire kingdom, over the 127 provinces. We are not told why he was promoted, but we will see that the hand of Satan was behind his promotion. Satan had a job for this man to do for him. So high was his post that the king commanded that all the other officials should kneel down before him. In verse 2. However, Esther's uncle, the Jew Mordecai, refused to kneel down before him. That was against their law. They were not to bow down to anyone other than God. The king's servant asked Mordecai why he would not bow. And he said that he was Jewish. He should never have said that. Haman now hated him, and he hated all the Jews, and he wanted them all dead. In verses 5 to 11, we see the reaction of Haman. He was filled with rage, with wrath. He set in motion a plan to destroy all the Jews in the kingdom just because of that one man, Mordecai, who would not bow before him. His first step was to cast lots to determine a suitable date for the mass execution. When do we get rid of the Jews? So let's set up a date on the calendar. And the date was almost a year away in verse 7. Then Haman, the wicked man, convinced the king that there was a group of people in his kingdom who were a danger to the kingdom. He urged that a decree be issued ordering their extinction. It was a snake. He even offered to pay for the expenses or the loss of income of those dead people. The king expressed no interest in using Haman's money in verse 11. Instead, he gave Haman a signet ring, and Haman could claim the king's authority for all his action. In verses 12 to 15, Haman set his plan in motion. He made copies of the edict ordering the destruction of thousands of innocent men, women, and children, and sent them throughout the kingdom, sealing them with the king's ring. The date of execution was set for the 13th day of the 12th month, which is March. So March 13, the Jews were going to be executed. Then Haman and the king sat down and had a drink together, but the entire city of Susa and all the Jews, they were confused and they were afraid. The story goes on in chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes, mourning. Since Mordecai had been the cause of Haman's anger against the Jews, he must have felt terrible. Now, because of me, all the Jews are going to die. So he put on sackcloth on his body. He put ashes on his head. That's a sign of mourning. He lamented through the city until the gate of the king. He could not go any further. Jews everywhere were fasting, were praying, were weeping, were wailing. It was a terrible time. In verses 4 to 8, Esther's servant told her about Mordecai's behavior. She sent Mordecai some clothes for him to wear, but he refused the clothes. Then Esther sent one of her eunuchs to see Mordecai. His name was Hatak. That's a good pit bull name, Hatak. Mordecai told him all that had happened, told him the money that had been paid for the destruction of the Jews, and even showed him a copy of the decree. In verses 9 to 12, Esther sent a reply back to Mordecai. She reminded him that anyone approaching the king without being summoned was put to death, period, unless the king extended his gold scepter and pardoned that person's intrusion. She had not been summoned by the king for the past 30 days. Maybe she felt that she had fallen out of favor. If she went to the king, she would surely lose her life. Though Esther did not actually refuse to see the king, she was clearly at that time putting her own welfare before that of the thousands of Jews throughout the kingdom. In verse 13, Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Mordecai informed Esther that she herself will not escape death if Haman's massacre of the Jews take place. She's not safer in the kingdom than any other Jews anywhere else. Yes, she might risk death if she goes to the king, but she will certainly face death if she does not go. By seeking to save her life, she will surely lose it, as Jesus said in Mark 8. Furthermore, if Esther remained silent, Mordecai was sure that relief and deliverance for the Jews will come from another place. God will not let his people be killed. God will save his people by one means or another. But Mordecai clearly believed that Esther was the one. She was the means God had chosen to use. Mordecai added the words, "Who knows whether you have come to this royal position for such a time as this?" Saying, this is why you were made queen instead of Vashti. Had Vashti remained queen, all the Jews of the region would have died. Mordecai trusted God for deliverance. No one on earth could have foreseen that this wicked man Haman would rise to power and would threaten to destroy all the Jews. But God foresaw it. He knew. And that's why he caused Queen Vashti to be removed and Esther to be chosen in her place. God knew his people would be in danger, and he set in place in advance the means of their deliverance. Esther needed to realize why she had become queen. God put us in certain places, certain positions for certain things, important things. Yes, she could refuse to save her people. She could say no to God. But if she did, she would be the loser. That is true of all of us who have been called by God to a particular task. There is a good reason for us to be where we are. Yes, we are free to refuse. But if we do refuse, great blessing will be forfeit. God's sovereign purpose will be accomplished. God will deliver his people. God will use someone else. And sometimes God promotes his human instrument as he did in Esther's case. At other times he may demote them as he did Joseph's case. In Genesis, Joseph lost his job. We need to see ourselves as God's instrument in the world, everywhere we go, whatever we do. Whether we are cast down, whether we are lifted up, whether we lose a job, whether we are promoted to another job, we need to understand that God is working out his eternal purposes through us. Understanding this will change your life. You will rejoice, knowing that God's hand is upon your life. Then verse 15, Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Here we have the plan of Esther. She agreed to risk her life for her people. But she asked Mordecai to gather all the other Jews in Susa and to fast and pray. She and her maid servant will do the same. Among the Jews, fasting was always associated with prayer. Fasting and prayer. Here they were praying that the king will respond favorably to Esther's plea that the Jews may be spared. And then the story continues in chapter 5. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. And so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. That was the thing to do. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." That was just saying they would never give half the kingdom. On the third day, after the fasting and prayer ended, Esther went to the king, and God caused Xerxes, the king, to respond favorably to Esther's approach, and he extended to her the gold scepter. Then he asked her what she wanted. He knew that she did not risk her life unless it was something very important. Xerxes offered to give her anything that she asked for. In verses 4 to 8, Esther did not give an answer to the king. Instead, she invited him and Haman, the wicked man, to a banquet that she had prepared for them. During the banquet, Xerxes, the king, again asked Esther about her request. What is it that you want? And she put off the answer a little bit. She invited the king and Haman to a second banquet for the very next day, at which time she promised that she will make her request known to the king. We do not know why she postponed. We do not know why she needed an extra day to answer the king. But she was led by God. In verses 9 to 14, Haman felt happy and proud that he was the only person in the kingdom invited by the king to Queen Esther's banquet. When he spoke to his wife and friend, he began to boast about his wealth and his influence, but he could not enjoy any of it because of one Jew who refused to kneel before him. Haman's wife and friend suggested a solution to his dissatisfaction. Get rid of that Jew. He won't bow to you. Get rid of him. And they proposed that he would be hanged on a 75-foot gallows. At his house, they built a gallows to get rid of that one Jew. Before the extension of all, he could not handle this man. He got under his skin. He wanted to get rid of him. If Mordecai was hanged the very next morning, then Haman will be able to enjoy life and enjoy the second banquet with Esther and the king. But God had a different plan. We read in chapter 6, that night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servant who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So while Haman was sleeping, God made sure that the king could not sleep. And trying to fight his insomnia, the king had the Chronicles read to him. You cannot use the scripture to justify that the book of Chronicles is an excellent tool to put people to sleep. By divine fluke, the proportion that was read, all the Chronicles, the guy opened the Chronicle to read, and it happened to contain the account of the attempt on his life that had been foiled by Mordecai. Upon inquiry, he learned that nothing had ever been done to reward this man for saving his life. There was no coincidence. In verses 4 to 9, Haman came in the court in the morning to ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai, not knowing that Haman had come. The king asked him what should be done to someone the king wanted to honor. The proud Haman thought, who else but me would the king want to honor? So thinking that this great moment, his great moment had arrived, Haman suggested the most elaborate parade, wearing a royal robe, bestowing the honors of the king, and using the king's horse. He had all kinds of plan. In verses 10 to 14, the king ordered Haman to hurry and bestow all these honors, but not on him, but on Mordecai, the Jew that he hated. The gallows has been set up at his house, 75 foot high, and now he's promoting this man. Haman, not happy, went out to proclaim his worst enemy as the man whom the king delighted to honor. Pride goes before destruction, we are told in Proverbs 16:18. Someone said, the proud has a mirror in which he sees himself, and the humble has a window through which he sees others. Big difference. Totally deflated and disappointed, Haman retreated to his house, and he reported these strange developments. His wife and his friend did not have any words of encouragement for him. They said, if Mordecai is Jewish, you will not prevail against him. Thank you very much. And by then it was time for Haman to hurry off to Queen banquet. Chapter 7 is an exciting chapter. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day of the banquet of wine, the king again asked to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. At the king's request, Esther finally made her appeal. She asked for her own life and the lives of her people who had been sentenced to death. And she added in verse 4, had they been sold as slaves, she would have held her peace, even though the enemy could not compensate for the king's loss. the Jews, they were taxpayers, and killing all those Jews, the king would have lost a lot of revenue. The king had never been told by wicked Haman how much money he would lose if the Jews were killed and no longer producing revenue. Verse 5, so King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he? And where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, I can see her with a soft-spoken voice, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine, and he went into the palace garden to calm down. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch over Esther. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. The king asked, who in the world would dare to order the destruction of my queen? Esther said it was the wicked Haman. Haman's true character was now fully revealed. Now he knew what kind of man he really was. The king stepped out in the garden to calm down a little bit. He was a raging lion. His conscience might have bothered him a little bit because he was part of that approving the terrible massacre. He was in favor of it at first. In mortal fear, Haman threw himself before Queen Esther, pleading for his life. The king returned in the room and he interpreted this attempt as an assault sexually on his wife. He was all over her. Haman's fate was now sealed. Without an express word from the king, the servants came and they covered his face. That was a prelude to execution. A person who was going to be executed, first thing they would do, they would cover his face with a black bag. It meant that the person did not deserve to see the light of the day anymore. And the story ends in verse 9. Now Arbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows, 50 cubit height, that's 75 feet, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf. It is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hang Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. So one of the eunuchs named Arbona told the king about the gallows that Haman had built. The king ordered the scoundrel to be hanged on it. So Haman took Mordecai's place on the gallows, the reverse of Jesus taking the place of Barnabas on the cross. He reaped what he had sown. We all reap what we sow. And then the king's wrath ended. In the rest of the book, Mordecai was advanced to Haman's position. He became the second. He was given Haman's house. The king granted the Jews to fight and to defend themselves. The Jews destroyed their enemy. Many Persians turned and became converted to Judaism. They established the Feast of Purim to remember what the Lord had done. That was a special thing that God had done. Without naming the name of God one time, we see his hand all over the place. How he guided each event. Mordecai was made second to the king in rank. The story has a good ending. So we see here Things do not happen by chance. You may think so, but it is not so. God controlled all the events in this story here. Knowing the evil heart of a man and his plan to destroy the Jews, God put his people in place. He made sure Esther was selected to be the next queen and no one else. So many young girls were taken, chosen, brought to the... He picked that one. And she learned why God had put her there. We should consider why God has put us in the place where we are. We should be willing to act before our opportunity slips away. Next week, we will continue with the story of Job, and it will be the last of the character studies. Only poetry and prophecies is left in the rest of the Old Testament. After that, we will start a study verse by verse of the book of Revelation. There are many Haman in this world today. Wicked people who hate Christians, who would love to trip them, hinder them, if not get rid of them. And God may use you at time to stand in the gap and to do something to prevent the enemy from accomplishing what he desires to accomplish. God can use us at any time. Why? He bought us. He died for us. He owns us. We belong to him. He can do with us as he pleases, and yet so many Christians refuse that. No, I'm a free will agent, and they're miserable people. Just let go. Let the Lord take over your life. Let him guide you. If there's opportunity, it may be risky, may be a little dangerous. Trust the Lord and go where he wants you to go. Do what he wants you to do. And live a great life in the hand of God, directed by God, and also protected by God. He loves you. He died for you. He's not going to put you in a place where you are going to suffer and die. No. Trust him. Walk with him. And have a wonderful life. So may the Lord be with you. May the Lord bless each and every one of you. May he bless your life, your family, your children. May he protect you from the evil one. And may he use you as he sees fit to do things for him, for his kingdom, while you are here on earth, living for him. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.